Hey everyone, welcome again. I'm glad to have you back to hear another conversation about our disaster work here in the Synod. Today we have the opportunity to talk with a good friend of mine, Maryn Olson. Maryn and I have worked together for many years doing disaster work here within Missouri. And so I will let Maryn have a chance to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she does and what she's been doing within Missouri. Maryn?
Thanks, Ben, and thanks for the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Disaster is literally what brought me to Missouri. I moved here in October of 2016 to run a disaster case management program grant in response to the December 2015, early 2016 flooding and severe storms that happened across the state of Missouri. And as if one disaster that had affected many, many counties across the state wasn't enough, as we were partway through that disaster case management program grant with FEMA funding to assist families and communities across the state, we had another disaster, surprise. So I stayed and ran the second disaster case management program grant that in response to the 2017 storms. So Ben and I had the opportunity to work together in response to that. And now, after those two grants ended, I took a position with St. Francis Community Services, part of the Catholic Charities of St. Louis Federation, running a long-term case management program for families in poverty in North St. Louis County and St. Louis City. So slightly different, but applying a lot of the same skills, quite frankly, because it's not necessarily a natural disaster, but life is a disaster sometimes for people. And all of the layers of trauma and oppression that people have experienced result in needing some of the same kinds of work, but not rebuilding homes, but helping people put their lives back together. I'm also involved with the St. Louis City County Co-ed, the Community Organizations Active in Disaster Network. I serve as the secretary. I think you could say I got voluntold to take that role. And I also have the privilege to serve as the chairperson of the Disaster Health Committee for National VOAD across the country, organizations that are involved in the health aspects of disaster. So I am continuing in that role.
That's great. Yeah, and I forgot to mention that Maryn is a member at Gethsemane Lutheran here in St. Louis, and is a longtime affiliate of Lutheran Disaster Response for many, many, many years. And even though she's working for Catholic Charities at this point in their disaster work, she's definitely still an advocate for the work of Lutheran Disaster Response. And it's great to have Maryn as a colleague and a friend. Maryn, you were talking a little bit about the flooding that we've seen, and that we've had over the last several years. We've had massive flooding events in both Kansas and Missouri. What are some of the other types of disasters that you've seen here in Missouri specifically, since that's where you've been working, and what does that look like to work within those?
Well, I think whatever type of disaster you're talking about, it's some sort of significant event that has a massive impact in disrupting people's lives. Disasters are equal opportunity destructors in some ways, but not everybody reacts in the same way. And I think that's the important thing to know in disaster work. And as people think about getting involved, some people have a support system and have resources and have savings and are more resilient in the physical ways that we can look at. But other people, most people, honestly, need some kind of help to get through disaster, because disaster absolutely turns your life upside down. So whether it's, we've seen tornadoes in Missouri, we've seen civil unrest in Ferguson and throughout the St. Louis region. We've seen flooding, of course. We've seen winter storms and ice. All of those types of disasters have a life-changing impact on an individual and a family and a community. And so sometimes it means that you lost your house, or your house has significant damage and you need to relocate for a while. Sometimes it means your work is affected, and your place of work has been damaged and you can't go to work. The individual impact varies significantly, but that's part of why disaster case management is so important. Disaster case managers walk alongside individuals and families to help them figure out, this is what happened to me, and put that in some context. And this is what I need the assistance I need, or this is the plan for recovery. And so often all of these community organizations, many of whom are supported by volunteers, and volunteers make those possible, come alongside that work and come alongside those families to muck out and clean out mud and mold and water damage, literally rebuild a house, put up studs and drywall and insulation and paint and all of those things to make a house whole again. But it's all of the different pieces of disaster, I think, that's what's so amazing to me about the disaster world, is that everybody has a role, everyone has a piece and a part to play in the process. And that's part of why it works so well, but also what makes it really complicated, because you have to get all of the pieces put together in the right order in the right time. But that's what makes it amazing too.
Yeah, so disaster case management is a place that traditionally throughout the country, Lutheran disaster response has a major role in. And as Maryn spoke about, when both of us were working at Lutheran Family and Children's Services of Missouri, that was a big piece that we were participating in with the disaster case management program. I've for years participated and helped provide training within the Central States Synod for people within the community and partners with for folks how to do disaster case management. And Maryn, as you were talking about disaster case management, one of the big things you were just talking about was the impact of volunteers into that process and the way that they interact. But I was wondering, do you have, how would you, trying to think how to say this, what have you seen from the volunteer work on how it has impacted the lives of the clients that we serve through that process? If that makes sense. I just stumbled through that, but volunteers have absolutely made it possible for people to recover. I don't think I can say that strongly enough. Volunteers, whether they come for a one-off day or a few hours, or they commit weeks and even months to working on construction in particular, but also clean out the muck and guts, which is get all the damaged stuff out to the curb and hauled away. But volunteers have helped people literally put their lives back together. So whether it's starting from, we had families who, I think of a woman in southern Missouri, a house that had a full basement, and it was a ranch style house. The water in that community was so high that it filled the basement. She had fish in her basement, actually, from the river, in a place that had never flooded before. And the water was so high, it was above my head on the water line on the outside of the house. That house had to be gutted. The bones were good, but everything had to come out down to the studs. Volunteers did that. Got the mud out, shovel by shovel by shovel full, and took out the drywall, cleaned everything out, treated it for mold, and then put the pieces back together, put up new walls, rebuilt the floors, rebuilt a new kitchen for her, putting in cabinets and all of the pieces. And had volunteers not been there, she would have had a shell, because she had FEMA money to buy the pieces. But with the money that she got from FEMA from the flooding, she certainly could not have paid a contractor to rebuild her house. So volunteers were absolutely instrumental
in putting that house back together so that it could be
Sure.
home again for this individual. That's what the impact that volunteers can have. So there are people that could do the construction, and you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to work in construction. Everybody can play a part, because somebody needs to run around and make sure everybody's got enough nails and screws, and somebody needs to feed people. Someone needs to clean up. If you know how to use a broom, you can be involved in disaster, as far as I'm concerned. But it takes all the different skill sets and types of volunteers, but most of all, it takes a willing heart and being able to take some direction. Somebody, running the project that has the whole vision and can say, okay, I need you to do this, and I need you to do this. But that's what it takes. So one room, one home, one street, one community at a time. That's the impact volunteers can have.
That's really good. Thank you, Maryn. As we're talking about this conference disaster team concept for each of our conferences within the Central States Synod, how would you encourage folks that are curious about disaster work within the Synod, that are curious about disaster work outside of the Synod? How would you encourage them?
Get involved, ask questions, quite frankly, because it takes people to do construction, and I know I've focused on that, but disaster is a whole process. And so there's preparation, there's helping people think about putting together a disaster plan. If you are capable of having a conversation with someone, you have a role to play in disaster, because you could help people within your own congregation think about what is their emergency plan, putting kits together for disaster. Do you have your important papers together in your own family? Getting your own house in order and helping other families in your congregation and community to get ready. So when a disaster does happen, the reality is we see that disasters are happening more and more across the country and around our world, and they seem to be more severe as climate change continues to show itself in the way weather systems happen. And so at some point, each of us will be touched by a disaster, likely, in our lives. And so be ready, your own house. Think about your congregation. Is there a plan? Maybe there's a way that your individual church could serve as a shelter. Do you have showers? That's something to think about as a congregation. Are you willing to house volunteers? Are you able to feed people? Can you make phone calls? Could you serve at a MARC, kind of a one-stop shop after a disaster in a community to welcome people in, to talk to individuals, see what kind of needs they have, make sure they get directed to the right resources. Everybody can be involved in some way. And so my encouragement is ask questions and see where you fit.
Awesome. Well, Maryn, really thank you. Appreciate your time. And thank you for joining us today. We'll look forward. We'll have another video or two coming out. And just thanks so much. We'll see you all later.
You're welcome. Thank you.